begrüße selbstverständlich auch.
I would also welcome your ambassador, Mr. Jakubowski.
Für die Friedrich-Naumann-Stiftung für die Freiheit begrüße ich Professor.
And from the Friedrich-Naumann Foundation for Freedom, I would like to welcome Professor Paquet and Mrs. Leuthäuser-Schnarrenberger. She is the vice president of the foundation.
Professor Ludwig Theodor Heuss, den
and Professor Ludwig Theodor Heuss, the president of the
für das Europäische Parlament begrüße ich
Board of Trustees. I would also like to welcome Nicola Baer, the Vice President of the European Parliament. She will give the laudatory speech today. And it is very nice to see a European flag in this site. We have been fighting for this for some time. In addition, I would like to welcome all those attending, the members of the German Parliament and the State Parliament of Hessen. And I would also welcome the President of the Magistrate. When do we see so many liberal-minded people assembled together? I would like to welcome every one of you very warmly here in Frankfurt, and I'm very happy to have this much liberalism in Paulskirche, St. Paul's Church. This is a very special year because next year we have the 175th anniversary of the assembly at St. Paul's Church, which we view as the nucleus of democracy. And as early as 1963, John F. Kennedy called the Frankfurt Paulskirche the cradle of democracy. And we in Frankfurt like to cite this with great pride. The urgently required renovation of Paulskirche, which has been under discussion for some years, is something we will no longer achieve. We have controversial issues. For one, the form in which Paulskirche is supposed to be restored. Should we have the old balconies again, or should we stick to this simple form of the post-war period? And there is discussion about the fact, why was it made in this way? Is it due to financial straits following the Second World War? Or did the architects of the day were trying to tell us something or convey a message? Maybe this was a suitable form for the period. And you have also been able to see a painting by Johannes Grützke when you came in. It's called The Procession of the People Representatives, and that again is controversial. At the last City Council debate, we had a lively discussion about this and the meaning of this painting. So there is a lot of discussion about everything. Planning for a structural upgrade of this building is going very slowly. It is supposed to be connected to the House of Democracy, one of the largest democracy projects in the Federal Republic. But even as regards the intention of this democratic center, there is still some disagreement. Should the primary concern be history or rather political education, for which other institutions already exist? So you can see that in terms of content, there is much to still clarify before construction. And then, of course, some of the delays were due to funding. The federal government and the state of Hessen were supposed to support this funding, but surprisingly, nobody actually thought about the fact that they might wish to have a say in the design of the building and the concept, and this again is protracting the matter. But we are confident that we will have everything finished by the 180th anniversary. And for us now, we have the advantage of not having to sit in a building site. So if that were the case, we couldn't actually be here today. The city is preparing its citizens for the event by means of a number of exhibitions and lectures. You already walked past the new permanent exhibition, Paulskirche Democracy Debate Monument, when you came into the church today. There's also a citizens association entitled Demokratieort Paulskirche, Democracy, the democratic location of Paulskirche, who reflect on the history of political decision-making. And they are looking at lines of continuity and breaks in the history of the Paulskirche. The influence of the Paulskirche movement on our current constitution is evident. During a meeting of this association, another interesting aspect was raised by some of the participants in the discussion. The origins of party democracy, as we know it in all parliaments today, was anticipated when they successfully created factions at the time. But without any like-minded supporters, you are simply not able to implement ideas, no matter how good they are. Thus, we can view today's event in the same light of working towards the anniversary events. And who did the judges of the Friedrich Naumann Foundation select as a suitable award winner for this year? It is the Slovakian president, Zuzana Čaputová, who has shown us how you can use perseverance and courage to drive populists from power.
The
fact that this is a long and laborious process is something she had to experience. But the representatives of Paulskirche, dear Mrs. Čaputová, were not successful in implementing their ideas immediately. The Naumann Stiftung has declared that the award winner has proven herself during her term of office as well as before as a dedicated fighter for the rule of law, human rights, and the consolidation of the European unification process. And with today's decision, Friedrich-Naumann Foundation is continuing to honor a number of excellent and liberal-minded people such as Friede Springer, Joachim Gauck, Helen Zille, and Mario Vargas Llosa. And let us not forget our great liberal Hans-Dietrich Genscher, who, from a German point of view, together with Helmut Kohl, made German reunification possible. So you can see that coalitions can manage to make the historically important decision without controversy. The city of Frankfurt congratulates you, Mrs. Čaputová, very warmly for this award, and you can be a role model of how politically active women can use persuasion and straightforwardness to effect change without arms. At this very moment, we are seeing in Iran what kind of political pressure can be created by women. I would like to thank you for your attention, and I hope that the Friedrich-Naumann Foundation will find Frankfurt a suitable location, even after reconstruction of Paulskirche, for awarding their Freedom Prize in future.
Sehr verehrte Frau Staatspräsidentin,
dear President, dear Mr. Ridsman, dear delegations from the Presidial Office in Bratislava, dear Mr. Ambassador Jacobucci, Excellency, I would also like to extend the General Consul of the United States of America, Mr. Norman Thatcher, and I would also like to welcome the General Consul of the French Republic, Gorgé, and I would also like to welcome very warmly the representatives of different diplomatic corps. Some of the names have already been mentioned. I would like to extend a very warm welcome to all of you. Dr. Renate Sterzel already gave us an introduction. I would like to thank her very warmly for the cordial words of welcome presented on behalf of the City of Frankfurt and the Council of Frankfurt. It's just a great feeling to know that we have a liberal-minded politician amongst us here at this historic place, a liberal welcoming us all. I would also like to welcome Professor Dr. Theodor Ludwig Heuss as the representative of the Board of Trustees. I would also like to welcome the colleagues from the different bodies, members of parliament, the representatives of boards of the different political foundations, mayors, members of city councils, Nicola Baer, and dear Ms. Leuthäuser-Schnarrenberger. I think I could extend this list endlessly, but let's say all protocol reserved and respected. Well, today we are very proud to welcome you here to award the most prestigious prize of the Friedrich-Naumann Foundation, the Freedom Prize. It's a real culminating point in the work of the foundation. Since 2006, we have been awarding the Freedom Prize every 2 years to honor exceptional personalities who have made a significant contribution to advancing liberal values in Europe and the world. By now, the Freedom Prize features a prestigious list of well-deserving laureates, mentioned before, ranging from the former federal minister Hans-Dietrich Genscher, the writer and Nobel Prize winner Mario Vargas Llosa, the former German president Joachim Gauck, the publisher Frieda Springer, and many more outstanding personalities who have received this award in the past. We would also like to use this opportunity to thank the City of Frankfurt for the hospitality shown towards us, so thank you very much again, dear Dr. Sterzel. We are meeting here in the historic place of Paulskirche, St. Paul's Church, the cradle of German democracy. Even if the Frankfurt Assembly in 1848 didn't produce the results expected, but we're meeting here today to celebrate outstanding achievements in advancing freedom and open societies. We are presenting this Freedom Prize at this historic place, and this is also an opportunity to remind ourselves that there is still a long way ahead of us and still a lot needs to be done. Madam Secretary Madam State Secretary, I can pledge that we will stay faithful and loyal to Paulskirche, irrespective of the architectural design and concept that will finally be chosen. No one can undo history. A lot remains to be done because freedom, ladies and gentlemen, is not to be taken for granted, and it is not a given. Liberals have kept repeating this message time and again, but in these days, these weeks, months, and years, it has become a new emotional relevance. Quite on the contrary, freedom is something that we have to fight for day in and day out. Today, the most visible and most dramatic fight for freedom is happening right at our doorstep, ladies and gentlemen. The courageous men and women in Ukraine are fighting each day to preserve our liberal values. They are willing to sacrifice their own lives to protect freedom, and they deserve our utmost respect and support for doing so.
Und ich füge mit Nachdruck hin.
And I would also like to say very explicitly, they also need the greatest possible support, ladies and gentlemen.
Wir sehen diesen Kampf für die Freiheit.
We can also see the same fight for freedom in other countries. Dr. Sterzel mentioned it in her introductory words. We can see this fight for freedom in the streets of Iran. Fearless women and girls, some as young as only 15 or 16 years old, are protesting publicly in the streets, calling for democratic change. Their slogan is "Women, Life, and, of course, Freedom." Women, life and freedom. This sends a strong message. It's a signal And I would like to say that we need to support these women. We want to support these women. I want to say this here at this historic place. The unprovoked war of Russia waged on Ukraine sometimes means that the situation in Iran is sidetracked. And this is something that I heard only last night when Friedrich Naumann Foundation organized an event. Well, I know that there are many men and women from Iran who have found shelter in Germany, people who had to leave their country, who've come to Germany, highly qualified, highly skilled people who would love to be at the service of their country, Iran. And they often say, you know, there is not enough attention for the situation in Iran. Sometimes it's only given secondary importance because of the pressing situation in Ukraine. And I can only subscribe to this comment made by many Iranians living in Germany. People in Iran are also fighting for freedom, and they deserve our full support as well. The developments in these countries make one thing very clear to me. Humans are born to be free. Humans strive for freedom even in the most adverse and most restrictive of environments and regimes, even if it costs us our own life, because it is freedom that is at the core of our human dignity. Freedom is the most important of all values. It is the conditio sine qua non, the prerequisite for all other values. This is why freedom has to be fought for on a continuous basis. It has to be nurtured and promoted every single day. It is precisely for that reason that Friedrich-Naumann Foundation decided to change its official name back in 2007, which was long before I came on board. We changed our official name to add the phrase "for freedom." This was upon the initiative of the chairman of the board, Wolfgang Gerhard, and Jürgen Bohler, who was the then president of the board of trustees. Both gentlemen are here today, and I would like to extend a very warm welcome to both of them. And I would also like to say that Wolfgang Gerhard is also the mastermind behind today's prize ceremony, ladies and gentlemen. Friedrich Naumann Foundation is represented in more than 60 countries across the globe, and we are often faced with very different and diverse challenges. But defending and promoting freedom is the common denominator in all of the projects which we work on, and these projects being extremely different. We are championing this freedom across the globe, even in those countries where we thought that we had successfully established freedom. The European Union was founded on the principles of freedom. It was based on the promise of a life in dignity, respecting the rule of law and human rights. Many countries in Central and Eastern Europe, including Slovakia, are living proof that this promise holds very high appeal. After overcoming communist rule in the late 1980s and early 1990s, the Central and Eastern European countries modernized their countries based on the ideals of freedom, tolerance, and diversity, and they have embarked on the path to a European future. I would even go as far as saying they fought their way to this European future. This development goes to show that the European Union, the EU, has been a beacon for those ideals and continues to be so. But having said this, it also shows that you must never rest on your laurels and take anything for granted. Because the European Union does have its flaws, to put it in very diplomatic terms. Even within our own borders, we can see that governments of EU member states are undermining our liberal values. If we want the freedom we are enjoying today to last in the future too, we must never accept any attacks on our liberal values. Even if we manage to defend our own values within our own borders, we can be a voice for greater freedom across the globe. But we need to set the example.
Deshalb brauchen wir Menschen.
For this reason, we need people who actively promote free and open societies within the European Union. We need politicians who are prepared to speak up to defend liberal values, even if this might not be particularly popular or opportune at the moment in time. We need people who know how to lead. We need leaders who stand by those who need our support in their quest for freedom. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure and privilege for me to be allowed to deliver this speech, and I'm proud to say that we are awarding the Freedom Prize to an outstanding personality who has been doing exactly that, and who continues to do so in a high office. Your Excellency, dear President Čaputová, it is a great honor for our Liberal Foundation, and please let me say that, for all liberals in Germany, to be allowed to present the Freedom Award to you today. With your relentless and tireless commitment to liberal values, the rule of law and democratic principles, you have contributed to a more open and more liberal society, not only in your own home country, but across Europe as a whole.
Als Sie, Frau Präsidentin, zur Präsidentin der Slowakei
Madam President, when you were elected president of Slovakia, you were seen as a beacon of hope for more democracy for the whole region. These were the reports you could read in different international newspapers, and I do remember this very well. You took office in June 2019, and ever since taking office back in 2019, you have never squandered this hope. You have never disappointed us, despite the multiple or consecutive crises, as politicians like to call it these days, and despite personal attacks, defamation and libeling you suffered. You stand for a liberal pro-European cause. You are a voice of freedom in a region where illiberalism has been on the rise. You are a shining example for liberals all over Europe. You are living proof that it is worth the while to stand up for liberal values, even if this might not be particularly popular. And for that, we are deeply grateful to you.
Meine Damen und Herren,
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm almost at the end of my introductory words. It's a great pleasure now to hand over to Nicolas Baer, Vice President of the European Parliament. We will hear the award speech to honor you and your work. We will first hear a piece of music, and the laudatory speech will then be presented by Nicolas Baer, Vice President of the European Parliament. Dr. Sterzel was very appreciative of the first piece of music, which was beautiful. The ensemble is called Musica Libera. We are allowed today to enjoy this beautiful music thanks to Musica Libera. Well, in a different role I have, I'm allowed to contribute to selecting scholars, and in this role I would like to draw your attention to this group, Musica Libera, which the group which doesn't only exist of these three ladies, it's a larger group of musicians. This group stems from the group of scholars of Friedrich-Naumann Foundation, and it's not been created upon the initiative of the board or the board of trustees, but it was an idea that was brought forward by our scholars. And Musica Libera accompanies the liberal year. Unfortunately, we were quite limited in our activities for the past 2 years during the COVID-19 pandemic. We had to use online meetings, virtual meetings, but now again we can meet in person on site, and we have once again got the opportunity to enjoy this beautiful music thanks to our scholars. I would like to thank you for this great initiative to form this group. We talked about democracy, we talked about freedom, and I could also mention arts and culture and music as important mainstays and pillars. You will be able to experience some of it yourself. Something we're particularly proud of, one of the babies of our foundation. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll hand over to our musicians.
Verehrte Frau Präsidentin Čaputová,
dear President, Mrs. Čaputová, Dear Renate, dear colleagues of the Friedrich-Naumann Foundation for Freedom, dear delegates from the various parliaments, ladies and gentlemen from the diplomatic corps, and dear ladies and gentlemen. The fact that this historic location, the Paulskirche, is a most suitable place for awarding the Freedom Prize is something that Dr. Sterzel has already told us. It is a building that symbolizes freedom and democracy like no other building in Germany. At a time when we have authoritarian regimes run by left-wing and right-wing populists attacking our freedom, it is particularly important. They remind us that it is precisely these values that we consider a given too lightly. And they remind us that these values have to be defended again and again every day. About an hour's flight away, these values are now being attacked by military force in the neighboring country of Slovakia, whose head of state is giving us the honor of her presence today. Mr. Paquet has already mentioned that Ukraine is not only fighting for itself, but for the whole of Europe, for our rule of law and for democracy. This is why it is our democratic duty to support Ukraine wherever and in as much of a way as we are able to do. Many of the countries in Eastern and Central Europe and in the Baltics are much dedicated to this. They know from their own historic experience what it is like to live under Soviet rule. The people in those countries know what it feels like not to be free. Surveillance, being monitored the whole time, trying to break the people's will, having destroyed chances in life. These memories are very much alive in the minds of many families, and the consequences of the experience that people had between 1945 and 1989 are by no means a thing of the past. Have we understood this in the West? Have we understood why the Central and Eastern European people are so much more forceful in demanding support for Ukraine? And have we understood what this war is actually about? Long before the Russian war on Ukraine, on a country that we used to be divided from by the Iron Curtain, there were warning voices like yours, Mr. President, that were all too often ignored. The criticism of Russian pipelines were dismissed by quoting economic points of view. And the countries to the left and right, and also the countries of the German parties in societies, causes division. People used to say that the people in the East had to arrive in the way of life of the West first, and this is now something we are paying the price for. We had wrong perceptions, and we had false friends, and we have paid lip service to many of them, which is why this war is not going to leave Europe untouched. Economically speaking, the Central and Eastern Europeans have shown Western Europeans how growth can be achieved. The transformation states are much more sustainable than the Western countries. That does not apply to export, though. The greatest partner for Germany in exports is no longer the USA. It is no longer China. It is the four Visegrad states. Visegrad is something that the West views with a critical eye sometimes. It is an alliance of Poland, Slovakia, Czech, and Hungary. We also have something that we don't often see in the West, except in the cooperation of the Benelux states. The Visegrad states had a common interest in the EU and NATO, we used to think. But this is actually not the case. In the 14th century, Central European rulers met there for the first time in 1335, and they agreed on close political cooperation as well as economic cooperation in terms of trade. Those who climb up to the castle in Visegrad and look down on the knee of the Danube can get an idea of the unusual dimension of this cooperation in the 14th century. And they will no longer wonder about the self-perception of these four cooperating states, which has by no means reached its end. The Central Europeans have shown us how unstoppable the wish for freedom can be. The public revolts of the people in Hungary in 1956, the Prague Spring in 1968, led by Czechoslovakia, by the way, by Alexander Dubček, a Slovak, the uprising of the workers in Gdansk at the Lenin Lenin docks, the shipyard. This is something that we have all seen, and if you want to see shining eyes, then mention those events to people in those countries. They have not given in to those who occupied them. They risked their lives and their future in order to gain freedom. The president of Slovakia you know that Slovakia currently has the presidency of Visegrad, and she has also been dedicated to the fight for freedom. And we should not wonder if the economic strength of these countries will influence Europe more greatly in future. The unstoppable wish for freedom that existed in the Visegrad states in the late 80s have basically taken hold all over Eastern Europe. This has changed Europe once and very profoundly, and it almost unified it. The European politician can think of a number of reasons why the political potential has not been fully developed and explored in the intervening years. The political Gazeta Wyborska has raised this with an idea that this might apply to the whole of Central and Eastern Europe. He warned against different types of democracy in autocratic states. To be rooted in socialism means that this ghost of the past could continue to exist in the future. That was what was raised at the time. How could this be? What did Vishnik from the newspaper wanted to say at the time? He was an anti-communist dissident, and he was fighting the effects of the socialist states. But he said that the politicians cannot stand still. They cannot limit their thinking to rejection or to prevention of new totalitarian and authoritarian structures within states. If that were the case, they could develop in the same way as what they are fighting against. And rejecting the collective or rejecting the lack of freedom is something that has to be developed with a view to societies of the future within a democratic society. Mrs. Čaputová wrote to us politicians in the European Parliament some other things. You cannot have politicians being technocrats. You have to strive for being role models and for being true to your cause. And Mrs. Čaputová, on that Wednesday in the European Parliament, you spoke directly from my own heart, because you said that we have to uphold truth and defend it. And Hans-Dietrich Genscher, who was one of the award winners, or the first award winner of this prize, he said the world of the 21st century will only remain stable if it is governed by the strength of the law and not by the law of the strongest. It is our job to strengthen our rule of law. It is up to us to better defend our democracy against attacks. It is up to us to defend our European values, both within our own borders as well as externally. Dear ladies and gentlemen, such an advocate of European liberal values is amongst us today. Ever since we read and heard about her, President Čaputová has always stood up for democracy and freedom. She has been an advocate of the rule of law and has fought for this. Whether it was in the public debate against clandestine networks and nepotism, against corruption or irregularities within the justice system, up to corruption with regard to judges' decisions, all these have paved her way to the leadership in Slovakia. And she has done something that has created trust amongst the electorate, because she did exactly what she said she would do before the election. True to the motto that a head of state's job is not to take populist themes seriously, but to make these issues popular. And she has courageously fought against all these other influences. Slovakia has been helping Ukraine not only in military terms, but also in humanitarian terms. From the beginning of the war, the country and its 5 million people have taken in hundreds of thousands of refugees. This, ladies and gentlemen, is another dimension than we have in Germany, where the welcome culture is welcome in some circles, as long as it doesn't actually affect everyone's lives. In Slovakia, it is a different thing. Refugees are understood, are a given in everyday life. And Mrs. Čaputová has fought against anti-immigration movements within her own countries, and according to surveys in her own countries, her country is one of those that is most critically minded towards immigration. But Mrs. Čaputová's unswerving liberal compass, which has guided her through this war, have earned her a great deal of respect. This is all the more true because this policy has made her once more the target of attacks from her political opponents. Once more have there been personal attacks against her, and it was not only the war on Ukraine which caused them, they happened before. For many years before she was elected, her home country was undermined by a leadership that did not uphold European values. And this is it is the case that Mrs. Čaputová has opposed this populism, and this was not an easy way to go. During her election as president, Slovakia was in uproar. In 2018, the country was shaken by the death of the investigative journalist Jan Kuciak, who had reported on corrupt entanglements in the highest echelons of government. His death gave rise to an urgent desire of change and triggered large demonstrations in Slovakia. Čaputová is one of the people who campaigned in favor of this change. In her election campaign, she promised to combat corruption and to end the culture of impunity from criminal proceedings. And she did not allow anyone with criminal leanings to accompany her in her election campaign. And she had an election campaign that banked on hope and progress instead of fear and division, something that was unusual for the rough political culture in Slovakia. In this way, she gained favor amongst the Slovakian voters in various regions, age groups and educational levels. But we had a Habsburg soldier who coined the proverb, many enemies, much honor, in Germany. So if there is a lot of flack attracted by a candidate, then this candidate is doing something right. Let me talk about something that distinguishes our award winner, which is the way in which she dealt with all these dirty attacks. She reminds me of a former First Lady, Michelle Obama, who said, "When they go low, we go high." You have never got tempted to launch similar personal attacks on your political opponents. This is a rare way to go forward, but it has been noted by the media, and especially by the people. This particular style, this hallmark of your work, has given you something that politicians live on for a long time, which is trust. Mrs. Čaputová is one of the few people who are stars on the dark sky of Slovakian politics. I would go even further than that. I would say your election victory was a signal and encouragement not only for the liberals in Slovakia, but in the whole of Central and Eastern Europe. The message is clear. Right-wing populists can be voted out of office. When you took office, you said, "I offer my expertise, my emotions, and my activism. I offer my mind, my heart, and my hands. I would like to be the voice of those who are not being heard." These were not just empty words, ladies and gentlemen. Mrs. Čaputová has people close to her heart, no matter how small the concern may be and how long the fight may take. She did not stop in the living environment of people in environmental matters. For years, she also was dedicated to citizens' rights and an open society. She joined politics actively in 2017 when she co-founded the party Progressive Slovakia. Now she is a member of the European liberal family, and like her co-founder, she is distinguished by her decidedly pro-European profile. It is also not surprising that Mrs. Čaputová is an advocate of women's rights. She's the first female president in Slovakia, and thus a role model for many people in Europe. Okay, so we see this in other Eastern and Central European states, but I like this vision in the European Parliament, where she was next to my president, Roberta Metsola. I think that gave a certain weight. But Mrs. Čaputová also has an effect beyond the borders of Europe. She advocates women's rights all over the world. In 2021, for instance, she was a co-initiator of a joint call by leading female politicians to end violence against women and girls in Afghanistan after the Taliban took power. Ladies and gentlemen, in times like these, it is crucial to have bright and compassionate people in leadership positions, people who have a clear European compass and who do not compromise on their liberal values, no matter how strong the opposition. Mrs. Čaputová embodies exactly that. She stands up for the rule of law, civil rights, and the protection of minorities. She stands for a sustainable European environmental policy. She fights against corruption and for transparency in society. Her resolute advocacy of a resilient democracy that fearlessly confronts internal and external threats deserves great respect. Dear Mrs. Čaputová, it is an encouraging signal for a value-based Europe to know that you are the head of state in Europe in times like these. There's one wish that I would like to express, dear award winner. Please take the stage beyond your country in Europe. The German president is right in one respect. In the last 30 years, we have created new walls between those who have made the long way out of socialist structures into a very different economic structures and a different type of state based on the rule of law, and those who were already there. This was a long way that was laborious and strenuous. In Europe, we did not have a West Germany that had to reorganize its justice system and create transparency. There are many things on which we could have an exchange. So, dear President, please raise your voice. Tell us about what is different, where you diverge from our experience, how people feel and think in your country, where we in the other European member states should listen more closely and where we can improve. And to quote Hans-Dietrich Genscher again, so that we can put on the other person's shoes in order to get a better understanding and for us to grow closer together within Europe, so that our continent will become an even better place to live for people who live in the continent. We have a Pope in Rome who is visiting the grave of the Holy Kirill, the national holy man of Slovakia. He built bridges in order to make the best of things and create results that are still felt hundreds of years later. Please, Mrs. President, please be the person who builds bridges between the different types of Europe that we have, the western part, the central part, and the eastern part of Europe, and all of us can only profit from your personality. Dear ladies and gentlemen, and now you are all invited to applaud our award winner, our dear President, Mrs. Čaputová.
Ja, meine Damen und Herren,
Ladies and gentlemen, I would now like to read the text of the certificate of the deed. The text is in English.
Freiheitspreis 2022, Friedrich-Naumann-Stiftung.
The Freedom Prize 2022 of the Friedrich-Naumann Foundation for Freedom will be presented to Ms. Čaputová, President of the Republic of Slovakia.
The 2022 Freedom Prize to President Zuzana Čaputová. During her term of office and before that, Zuzana Čaputová, President of the Slovak Republic, proved to be a committed defender of the rule of law, of human rights, and of deepening of the European integration. She has been courageous in fighting corruption and abuses of power in her country. She has joined the civil society calls for an investigation of the 2018 murder of journalist Jan Kuciak, who had been doing research into the enmeshments of organized crime and politics in Slovakia. She became a beacon of hope to all those in her country and beyond who take a stand for a strong and transparent democracy. Early on, she had been an active citizen and as a public interest lawyer advocated for environmental protection. With a campaign and legal case against a waste dump in her home country, Petzinok, she achieved a European Court of Justice ruling for involvement of the public in planning processes of projects affecting the environment. Already in her election campaign, she argued for accepting rights of same-sex couples in a country that made its ban on same-sex marriage constitutional. She has always lent a special support to minority and children's rights. As a champion of European Western values, she keeps calling for the rule of law to be adhered to in the countries of the European Union, especially in Central and Eastern Europe. Following the Russian invasion of Ukraine, she has positioned herself unequivocally against this act of injustice, despite considerable sympathy for Russia in her country. Around the world, she has garnered a great deal of respect for taking this stance. By granting this award, we honor Zuzana Čaputová for being a role model of democracy, a committed citizen of a country, and an advocate for the ideals of freedom. Unterschrift Ludwig Theodor Heuss, Chairman of the Board of Trustees.
Signed by Professor Dr. Ludwig Heuss, Chairman of the Board of Trustees of the Friedrich-Naumann Foundation.
Of the Friedrich-Naumann Foundation for Freedom, Frankfurt am Main, November 5th, 2022.
Dear Vice President Baer, dear Professor Dr. Pake, dear Professor Dr. Heuss, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, milí krajania, krajanky a priatelia zo Slovenska. I'm so glad to be here with you today in Paulskirche, in the place which plays a very important role in history of this city and of Germany. I'm deeply touched by your words, Madam Vice President, and I'm honored and humbled. The prize I'm receiving today is called the Freedom Prize, and I'm impressed by how this simple idea, freedom, has been so empowering over the course of our history. A few days ago, I watched a documentary movie about the life of two Catholic dissidents, Sylvester Krčméry and Vladimír Jukel, in communist Czechoslovakia. For years, the regime kept them in prison and tortured them. Yet they would always say that inside, in their spirit, they stay free. Communists could break their bodies, but they couldn't take away their freedom. Later, this motivated them to start building the underground church. They founded small groups called Islands of Freedom. People would secretly meet to discuss and pray together. Decades later, the underground church, together with civic dissent, played an important role in the regime's collapse. It was people like Krčméry and Jukel and many others who, in the end, helped us restore our freedom and democracy in 1989. To me, the lesson is clear. Only those who are free in their minds can build a free society. Freedom is a quality of an individual person, not an abstract value. You cannot separate the nature of society from the nature of the individuals who form it. Freedom cannot be imposed top-down. If it comes from outside, it will not last. It must be rooted, and equally, freedom is not a value-neutral concept. It must be rooted in values. Otherwise, it becomes a force of destruction. We must apply this lesson in practice and let this freedom of spirit be the guide for us and the future generations. Good laws and constitutions are important, but by themselves, they will not keep societies safe from autocracy. We, the politicians, must do our share to keep our countries free. But we are powerless unless parents, schools, foundations, and the churches also lead new generations to value liberty and freedom. That is why the work of foundations such as the Friedrich-Naumann-Stiftung is essential and much appreciated. Because, as your motto says, strong democracy needs responsible citizens, citizens who know what freedom is and who value it. Over the course of centuries, humankind tried and tested different political systems and ways to govern societies. Liberal democracy proved to be the best guarantee of freedom for any individual and any society. When I speak of liberal democracy, I speak of a political system which is based on check and balances, respect on rule of law, on respect for the rights and freedoms of everyone. But it seems to me that the many forget that freedom implies not just freedom to choose, but also freedom to refrain. To voluntarily refrain from doing something or having something because of the greater needs of the society. Liberal democracy requires that we voluntarily give up some of our freedoms so others can enjoy theirs. That we observe laws not only because of the threat of sanctions, but because we see that they work to our advantage and permit us to live peacefully in larger societies. Ladies and gentlemen, we are lucky to live in freedom in liberal democracy. Totalitarianism in Europe is over, but our democracy is not safe from various external and internal challenges. If we don't act, we might lose democracy again. And Applebaum and others are right to sound an alarm about the potential twilight of democracy. This must be a wake-up call for all of us. Let me begin with external threats. East of Slovakia's borders, Russia is trying to destroy Ukraine, not only as a sovereign state, but also as a community of free individuals. I saw it firsthand when I visited Kyiv a few months ago in June this year. There is no military logic to bombing a children's playground or churches. But if you want to break people's free will, if you want to break their resistance, it's sadistically logical. Every free individual has an obligation to defend the freedom of others. This is also our duty, the duty of the free world towards the Ukrainians, to support them not just in words, but in deeds, including through political, diplomatic, and military aid. Because our words of support and encouragement or our humanitarian assistance alone are not going to stop Russia's missiles raining on the Ukrainian cities this winter. Liberal democracy is also under the pressure of the ongoing economic crisis. European history is full of examples of how rising poverty and economic hardship undermine democracy. Many of those experiencing worsening of their living standards are starting to blame liberal democracy for failing to protect them. And many might be open to populist and authoritarian solutions which, while destroying democracy, offer false, quick fixes. To protect democracy, we must be guided not just by the logic of free market, but also by the values of compassion and solidarity. Addressing inequalities and supporting the most vulnerable is not socialism or communism. It is the right thing to do for any society which wants to protect freedom. Dear all, the war on the European soil and the economic crisis should not blind us to other risks we are facing at home. In Europe, liberalism has become a punching bag for those who want to destroy democracy. They present liberal democracy not as a system of governance protecting individual freedom, but as an ideology which supposedly dictates everything from the forms of sexual behavior to identity and ethnic makeup of our societies. They accuse liberal governments of being anti-conservative, of destroying traditions and even religion. Nothing can be further from truth. Liberal democracy ensures that an individual can make choices that are responsible towards a society, which are respected by others. The mission of the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom is the best answer to today's haters of liberalism. Too often, our own governments in Europe fail to apply to rules they adopted against those who are spreading hate. There is a good reason why we outlaw the incitement of hatred and why we criminalize the adoration of totalitarian regimes. Such actions can kill. That is not a theory, but the truth learned through our own bitter experience, including in very recent past. Only 3 weeks ago, 2 young innocent people lost their lives, and another one was injured in a terrorist attack in Slovakia, inspired by hatred of minorities. We mustn't allow our naivety and blindness to the fact that democratic rights can be not just used, but also abused to destroy democracy. The incitement of hatred and violence doesn't stop being illegal just because it's posted online. In fact, nothing symbolizes the naivety of some of today's Democrats more than their hesitancy to regulate social media platforms. The same rules that apply offline must be respected online. I very much hope that we will realize the scale of this problem before it's too late, because boundless and limitless freedom will turn into a force which will destroy the fabric of our societies. Dear all, to safeguard democracy, we must work together. And by we, I mean everyone who has a stake in preserving our democracy. Our opinions or solutions might differ, but we should maintain our ability to engage in a constructive dialogue, a dialogue which is based on a mutual respect for each other, and an understanding that even if our opinions or solutions differ, we all agree on the basic democratic values. Finally, to safeguard democracy, we must reinforce the values our societies are built on, such as humanism and mutual respect. We need to put a greater emphasis on ethics and morality, because they translate these values into norms of behavior. And we should make them more prominent in our education system, but also in our professional lives. Already 100 years ago, the first president of democratic Czechoslovakia, Tomáš Garrigue Masaryk, argued that democracy is not only a political system, but a moral one as well, a moral one first of all. This is why all of us who want to strengthen democracy must have high expectations first and foremost from ourselves when it comes to living by these values. In this regard, political leaders have a special responsibility and an obligation to follow them. If we live by these principles, I am sure that democracy and freedom will flourish. Thank you very much.
Dear Mrs. President, dear Mrs. Čaputová, dear Mrs. Beer, and dear ladies and gentlemen, many thanks, Mrs. Beer, for this very impressive laudatory speech, which has brought Mrs. Čaputová closer to us. Because not all of us here knew Čaputová and her work. We prepared a little bit today, but you have given us a completely different idea. I would like to thank you very warmly for that. And you, Mrs. Čaputová, I would like to thank you very much for your very inspiring words and your very basic reflections on freedom and liberal democracy. Yes, you are completely right. Freedom is not self-realization at any cost. It is not only about the me, it is also about us. All of us, as members of civil society, must respect the other person's freedom and sometimes use restraint in our actions. You call it freedom to refrain. Freedom can only be made alive in a value-based way and with mutual respect amongst people. Using freedom in a way that hurts anybody or debases them is not a value on which democracy can be built. Democracy as a governmental system and a form of structure means that you have to have the freedom of the market and the freedom of the individual to develop their potential, but then you also have the responsibility of maintaining freedom in a society with solidarity and with compassion, and thus to make life in a pluralist society possible in the first place. What liberal people consider enriching things like diversity, plurality, different opinions, freedom of religion, is something populists and those with an affinity of authoritarianism consider propaganda. They like an illiberal type of democracy. Apart from the fact that an illiberal democracy is a contradiction in terms, the attitudes behind such a systems are authoritarian. They are patronizing, and they deny basic rights such as the freedom to assemble, the freedom of science, and the freedom to hold an opinion. You have said, Mrs. Čaputová, that we have no option of limitless freedom, and we can see this every day in the effects that we have by the social media. Liberal people are not anarchists. They want to have regulations in place that are necessary and correct in order to safeguard different interests and to balance them against each other. This is, I would like to make one very topical remark. The right to hold demonstrations is not limitless either. And no matter if opinions are different and radical, even in the context of the climate crisis, we cannot have this at any price at all. And this is another thing that makes a democracy.
Liebe Frau Čaputová,
Dear Mrs. Čaputová, you are being called the moral compass of your country. Yes, you have convinced us of this in your very impressive speech. You represent freedom in a holistic way. Of course, social market economy and competition are a very important element, but freedom encompasses more, as you have told us. You are raising your voice against disinformation, hate, and incitement, against conspiracy theories of the most diverse type. You want a democracy that is able to defend itself. And we, the Friedrich-Naumann Foundation for Freedom, this is our engine that drives us forward. We have a responsible way of acting, and we want a functioning rule of law. We want a lively civil society, and above all, we want to live freedom in our society according to the rules set by democracy and the rule of law. I think I can talk for all of us. I can say this on behalf of everyone. Mrs. Čaputová, you have inspired us, you have motivated us, and you have made it very clear to us that democracy has to be defended both in terms of argument and in part, because we are trying to win the competition against autocratic movements. I thank everyone who participated in this festivity today, the presentation of the Freedom Prize of the Friedrich-Naumann Foundation to a woman for the 4th time. And I would like to ask for your attention to listen to Musica Libera, and after that I would like to invite you to a small reception. Thank you very much.